Title of this talk is "The Pandemic Response Needs Skeptic." It's really more the motivation for this talk. It's easier to fool people than it is to convince them they've been fooled, which is a quote attributed to Mark Twain. And it seems to be pretty apropos to what's happening in this pandemic and our pandemic response. This title of this article says it all. The COVID-19 panic shows us why science needs skeptics. And that's the role that I'd like to play here, is the role of skeptic, looking at different policies and analyzing them from a counter-narrative perspective. And part of the reason for that is just there's a pretty clear bad news bias in the media. Not only is there outright mistruths, but there's also outright bad news bias. This New York Times article, of all places, summarizes that quantitatively. About 87% of COVID coverage in the national U.S. media last year was negative. The share was 51% in international media, 53% in U.S. regional media, and 64% in scientific journals. The fact that there's scientific journals participating in this bad news bias is very concerning. One need only look at this particular quote from a CNN staffer to get the gist of what I'm talking about, why there's a bad news bias in the media, and what proof there is for it. And here's the CNN staffer, which is why we constantly have the death toll on the side, he continued, making reference to the coronavirus death tracker that would appear on the screen. It would make our point better if the COVID death toll was higher. So really, there's an emphasis in a lot of circles for bad news, more clicks, and more attention to your articles. And CNN really did a job of jumping in on that bandwagon. Even before COVID, though, it was pretty clear that the bad news bias was pretty prevalent. And this was just a flu article, for example, from January 2020, just before the pandemic. The flu season is hitting young people particularly hard, and it's not over. This sort of, already trying to drum up fear about the flu. And again, this is just a few months before the COVID pandemic. One thing I like to point out is just outright mistruths in the data and presentation of the data. And it's, easily verifiable as well. So post-Thanksgiving COVID-19 surge is here, what to expect? And so then the question really is, is there really a Thanksgiving surge, or was that just the trajectory that the virus is on to begin with? And so I showed two graphs of cases, one in New York and one for California. And as you can see, here's basically late October of 2020, and basically the trajectory of the cases. And somewhere in here, buried in the middle of this, is Thanksgiving. So is this really a surge, a post-Thanksgiving surge, or is this just a trajectory that we were on anyway? Same with California as well. Here's this quote-unquote surge actually was started somewhere here in late October, and somewhere in the middle here is Thanksgiving. And so they're calling this a post-Thanksgiving surge. And I really think what's going on here is the news was chastising people for getting together for Thanksgiving, trying to control people's daily behaviors, and then again, shaming them for having done something like gone out to see family. Here's about as plain an example of just outright lying, particularly from a source like Fauci to a New York Times reporter. When polls say only about half of all Americans would take a vaccine, I was saying herd immunity would take 70 to 75%. Then, when newer surveys said 60% or more would take it, I thought I can nudge this up a bit. So I went 80, 85. It's essentially what Fauci's admitting to here is lying. He's lying to the population to get them to do something that he would like them to do. And this is a repeated, recurring theme. And people are smart to it now, and they're realizing that this is how they've been treated by individuals like Fauci and a lot of these mainstream news sources. And as a result, they're pushing back on it, and it's caused a credibility crisis.